Music is something I've always thought of to be one of the very few universal languages. It's something that everyone, regardless of their race, culture, age, or beliefs, can understand and appreciate and enjoy on some level. And I think that's why it's one of the things, just like all art, that we use to turn to as a form of escapism, because it can transcend the things that seemingly divide us as people. I love getting into conversations with people that I would otherwise have very little in common with, only to find a unique connection with them through our love for a particular artist, a soundtrack, or album. When I started this small little channel, it was a pretty unambitious idea, and that was to simply take my love of some of my favorite video game soundtracks and give them just a fresh coat of paint. As someone who has spent a lot of his life writing music, it was an interesting side of the musical process to simply arrange and produce a new take on someone else's composition. But as many of you know, I soon started on a project to reimagine and rewrite the soundtrack for a game that I wanted to take my own swing at as a composer. The Metroid Dread series brought me into this little community with many of you who shared my thoughts on the soundtrack. It really was a fun exercise to take a completely finished game and soundtrack and then sort of retroactively input a what-if scenario if I was asked to write the soundtrack for it. But there were also some limitations and really unreachable goals when it came to that series, simply because the game was already finished. Imagine if I were to take, say, The Dark Knight, and say, as a creative exercise, I'm gonna refilm this movie with myself playing the Joker.
Hi.
No matter how refined my acting chops, there really would be no possible performance I could give that would be beneficial to put on camera. Not only is that just an all-time acting performance that Heath Ledger gave, we have all so closely identified that role in the movie with his performance. And in the same way, we inevitably associate soundtracks with the game or movie that they accompany. They become a very part of the fabric in a sort of irreversible way. And so to rip that fabric from the game and insert my own into Metroid Dread, there were fundamental things that when you make changes to it, it won't quite feel right. And as I said throughout that series, in my attempts to do that, I actually gained a deeper appreciation for the original soundtrack. And ultimately, it led me to ask myself, what would the process be like for me to create a soundtrack from the beginning of that process? What if I could take my love for musical composition, arranging, producing, and get to work with the game during its development cycle and create that original fabric for myself? And what if I got to show you on this channel what that process was like and get an inside look at music production for a video game? Well, in this series, we're actually going to answer those questions. Welcome to Arcade Redux. Several months ago, I was commissioned to compose the soundtrack for an upcoming game that's being developed by an independent studio. And for most of this year, I've been working to create the musical backdrop to a new original game. And it's one of the things that I've just dreamed of being able to do for most of my life. And thanks to honestly all of you for your support of this small channel, someone on the game's development team was aware of my work on that Metroid Dread series and gave me the opportunity to get on the ground floor of the development cycle and create my very own OST. It's been a huge learning experience for me to be a part of not just the music compositional side of things, but also just the collaborative nature of the process, learning to adapt and adjust to other aspects of game development, and ultimately learning on the fly how to, in practical terms, create an actual soundtrack. And it's something that there isn't really much of in terms of resources and guidelines. I haven't found a copy of Soundtrack Composition for Dummies. And so while at its core, I think every game, every composer and artist is going to approach it in pretty different ways. But I wanted to use this experience and opportunity to show you all a little bit of an inside look at that process for me. What are the unique challenges? What comes first, the gameplay or the music? These are some of the things I want to actually show you in the series. Let's actually look at the beta versions of the soundtrack and see how it progresses. Let's look at some of the concept art and visuals and think about how to form musical ideas from that. For today, I'm going to give us a quick overview of the game itself and give you a little sneak peek into the beginning stages of the soundtrack. Because the game is still in development, there are going to be things that can't be revealed fully, but we are going to be able to explore a lot of it, maybe just a little segmented. So the game itself is called Hacker. It's going to be a mobile and PC game. It's a pretty simple premise, but one that has some pretty cool avenues to explore from a story and musical standpoint. The general idea is you're controlling the representation of an antivirus software, and you realize quickly that there is an anomaly in the system you're fighting to protect. So as you maneuver through different waves of enemies and obstacles, you're learning and uncovering the nature of the anomaly with the goal of defeating it entirely at the game's conclusion. The game's structure is divided into individual levels with varying difficulty, which is great because that kind of creates a placeholder for different tracks for each unique level. And the levels themselves progress as you get deeper into them, ending with different boss battles throughout the length of the game. So there's kind of this cool recurring structure that I could pretty quickly get a sense of how I was going to structure the soundtrack. From an art design standpoint, I immediately gravitated to the cyberpunk, Tron type of sci-fi atmosphere, and I've had a lot of fun working in that vein to make something original and dynamic for the game. One of the main goals we had as a team, as we were talking about this in the early stages of the development, was we wanted the soundtrack to be very cohesive throughout, with melodies, motifs, and other elements that reappear and are developed themselves throughout the course of the game. And I love the idea of getting to do that with some original ideas of my own. There will be a lot of specifics to get into in future episodes. I think there are some things that I actually want to get into, like the nitty-gritty of composition and some music theory stuff with some of you. But for now, I just want to show you the first general idea that I created for the game. So this is the very initial, unpolished version of kind of the game's introduction when you first load it up. And this will eventually become a much bigger, more refined track as it exists today. But I want to start with kind of the embryonic beginning of where it started, with essentially nothing but the game's premise and a few clips of artwork. I basically sat down to start making just a sound palette and a general tone for what I wanted the soundtrack to embody. The first thing you're going to hear are kind of these digital effects that pull you into this digital world. There's definitely some Matrix-inspired ideas in this process. Then you're going to hear these kind of darker ambient chords, and from a harmony standpoint, this is, for me, what kind of painted the first picture of where I felt the direction of the soundtrack was going to go. It's a little bit of this mysterious, otherworldly palette. There's a lot of Dorian mode in the soundtrack, and I think one of the key relationships from a chord standpoint that I think kind of was the building block for a lot of the harmony is just that simple relationship between the minor 1 and the major 4. I think just that harmonic idea really kind of set the stage for a lot of where I wanted to go from a composition standpoint. But the last section is truly where I think you'll hear really the main substance dynamically of where I imagined the bulk of the soundtrack to reside, which is a more hypnotic, evolving musical presence that reflects the hypnotic nature of the gameplay. You'll hear also the first melodic idea that I had. And the goal with this was to kind of create something that I could use throughout different parts of the game and in different musical contexts, so you could kind of change the backdrop but still have this recurring theme throughout the game. To loop back to the beginning of the video, for me, the coolest part of getting to do this project is just the ability to take the language of music, this universal thing that we can all understand on some level, and use it to infuse emotion and depth into this game. It's been one of my favorite projects as a musician, and I can't wait to see how it all unfolds. So as we begin this journey, please let me know in the comments questions that you have about the process and development, and I'm going to do my best to answer them as the series continues. For some additional information about Hacker, including how you can help the game reach its end goal of development, Check out the description. I'll have some links in there for you. And until next time, this is Arcade Redux, and this is the initial compositional idea for Hacker.